Today is July 13th, 2018, and we are interviewing Marcus Lambright, who is 67 years old, having been born on April 10th of 1951. My name is Sue Burkholder, and I will be the interviewer, and Deb Cohan Rojas will be the court reporter today. And so, may I call you Marcus?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Marcus, for the recording, would you please state in what war and branch of service that you served?
I served in the United States Army from February 1970 to November of 74, and I was never in a war zone or in country. All my duty was right here stateside,
Okay, but it was during the time of
Vietnam.
Vietnam. Okay, perfect. Let's start with some biographical details. Could you please tell us we know the day you were born, but where you were born and a little bit about your parents, maybe what their occupations were and that type of thing.
I was born in Farmington, New Mexico. My mother's from Centerville, Utah. My dad is from Norman, Oklahoma. They met while my dad was in the service. He joined the Army at age 15 during World War II. His big brother, my Uncle Bud, signed for him. Um, they, uh, they were divorced when I was 8, and we moved to Nevada, where I grew up on my Uncle Bud's ranch farm. And so I grew up in Fallon, Nevada, which is where, not knowing much about Farmington, I was only in first and second grade there. So, but my mama's side of the family is Mormon, LDS. My daddy's side of the family is Southern Baptist, which is quite a combination. I have an older brother and sister, Linda and Linton. Linton's 11 years older than me. My big sister's 7 years older than me. I have a little brother and sister, Julie, who's 5.5 years younger than me, and a little brother named Jeff, who's 6.5 years younger than me.
Did any of your other family members besides your father serve in the war?
They didn't serve in the war. My big brother served in the New Mexico National Guard.
All right.
Now I have uncles. All my uncles served, except for one who had some sort of medical thing that kept him. He tried to join, but they wouldn't let him.
Okay.
My uncle Seymour on my mom's side, but my uncle Bill on my mom's side served, and all my uncles and my dad on my dad's side served.
What was your occupation before you entered the service?
I worked at the largest ammunition depot in Hawthorne, Nevada. It was called Hawthorne Naval Ammunition Depot, and I worked in ordnance, where we put together 5-inch 38s for the Navy, and shipped them off to Vietnam.
So, how did your family and your friends at the time feel about you going into the service?
My family, it's just common. It's it was like when there wasn't no lottery thing when I was a kid. You signed up right after you turned 18, right after you graduated. And about a week after you turned 19, you got your draft notice. And I tried to join the Navy. My stepdad was in the Navy, and listening to his stories just kind of interested me. So I tried to join the Navy, and I went and took the test in Reno. Did real well, but they had a 9-month waiting list. And my stepdad said, well, he's going to get drafted in a month or two, and then he won't have any choice. And of course, in the Navy recruiting office, there's also a Marine. Well, this Marine said he could have me out of there in a month. And my stepdad, he's kind of gruff. He said, I could have you out of here tonight. He didn't want me joining the Marines. So I just went ahead and joined I actually ended up joining the National Guard with some friends of mine, which only lasted about a year and a half. And then I lost 2 dear friends in Vietnam, and we just went ahead and went in. And I had a daughter and named Tiffany at the time. And if I made it out, I wanted to go to college, and which I did. And then while I was in, I had another daughter named Camille. So I have 2 daughters, and I just, like I said, it was in my era, joining. Of course, I know Vietnam had a kind of an ugly thing going with the hippies and stuff. It was kind of a bad thing. In fact, when I got out, it was kind of sad. When I did go to college, I went to college at Mount Hood Community in Gresham, Oregon. It's a suburb of Portland. And Joel, the guy there that took care of Veterans Affairs, he said, don't tell nobody he was in the Army. Now, at the time, of course, I'm a guitar player, so I had long hair and was playing in bands. Did not look the type that I'd been in the service. He said, "Don't tell nobody. He's in the army." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because they don't." He said, "They don't look too good on it." And I said, "Really?" And me being from Nevada, I'm a cowboy. That's my nickname. And you don't want to be messing with me about my religion or my patriot. So if somebody would have gotten fussy with me, there'd been a boxing match because I had a hot temper when I was younger. But nobody ever bothered me. Nobody ever said anything. And so I kind of, and like I said, I'm pretty happy-go-lucky and easygoing. But there's certain things that anybody gets upset when people cross certain lines in a person's life. But like I said, I just never had any much problem at all.
Okay.
And I went to school there for 2 years. I majored in music and minored in business administration. And then while I was there, growing up a carpenter, I started my own company. I'd work after classes during the week and on the weekends doing construction carpenter work, and to subsidize my GI Bill, because back then they didn't match your funds like today. They match your funds.
Mhm.
Back then I got $602 or $604 a month. They didn't match nothing. They just what you got. And so those 2 years I subsidized my income, my GI Bill, with just working after class and during the week and on the weekends.
Okay. Well, once you signed up to go in, um, you would have headed off to basic training.
Mm-hmm.
So when you got there and when you, like that first day when you were just walking out, what was your feeling and how did that day go for you?
Well, we flew from Reno, Nevada to Fayetteville, North Carolina. We were going to Fort Bragg. And if you remember, I joined with a couple of friends, Mike, and the other one of his name was Mark. The other one's name was Mike. And we got there a day early. And so we actually stayed the night in a park and got the bus out to the base the next morning. And it was my big brother, being 11 years older than me, he was telling me, "Don't volunteer for nothing. Just keep your mouth shut and do like you're told." In fact, I followed all the advice he gave me. I followed, and it worked out for the best. But it was definitely a culture shock. And then my mom was pretty strict with us kids. You paid attention and didn't sass mama, and kind of that sort of thing. So there was some of it that wasn't so bad. And in fact, I remember the first time I called home, Mama asked me how I was going, and I said everybody's fussing about having to get up early, but I grew up on a ranch. We got up at 5 o'clock. We're in boot camp, but didn't have to get up till 5:30. So I was already awake, shampooed and shaved and showered by the time everybody else was getting out of bed. I was ready to go to work because I had to do chores and then come in and get cleaned up and go to school, catch a bus. We lived 10 miles out of town, so that part of it was just kind of common. But yeah, the rest of it was wild. It was definitely, I didn't know what to expect, even though, like I said, a big brother telling you things to do and not to do. And just pay attention and do like you're told. And it went, but that wasn't just the first day, the first week or 10 days. It was like, whoa. And of course, later on we understood, some guys I don't think did, but they got to get you to the point to where you have to follow orders. Because if you hesitate during an order in a war zone, you may cost yourself or somebody else their life. So once I understood that, I had no problem with any of it, none. But it took a while. That didn't happen overnight. Believe me, you was a little rebellious. You're only 19. And I didn't want to take orders from nobody, but it finally sunk in.
Did you have any memorable instructors or ones that just made an impact on you?
Oh, two. My senior drill instructor was Drill Sergeant Boykins. He's a black man. I've always been pressed. If you notice, my pants are creased. When we left home for school, my mom always had us pressed. So when we getting in the service, everything was pressed. Of course, back then we didn't have the camouflage stuff. It was just OD green. But Drill Sergeant Boykins was the most strapped troop, and I just had the ultimate respect for him. And he had this deep voice. When he talked, man, it was like he was listening to God more, because you wanted to pay attention. And then my drill sergeant was Drill Sergeant Craig. and he was ornerier than an ornery. And his nickname was Warhog. He had been to 3 tours of Vietnam, wanted to go back. They wouldn't let him go. And but he was those two, and of course the other drill sergeants for the other. I was in we was in Charlie Company, and I was in you got a there was 4, 5. There was 5 barracks, and each barracks was like Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. I think there was only 4. Yeah, Delta. And but we were in Charlie Company, and I was in Charlie platoon, and Drill Sergeant Craig, he slept in our barracks. I always thought it was funny because at the end of our barracks it said temporary building 1941. In fact, when we graduated, we had to stay an extra week and a half. We closed up the training center at Fort Bragg, and then me and my 2 guys I joined with, we went on to Fort Knox, Kentucky for our advanced individual training. They called AIT.
Right.
But yeah, and then of course you're supposed to be quarantined to the company area, the battalion area. And of course we snuck. When we got to the bus depot and was going to take a bus out the thing, actually we didn't take the bus. A cab driver picked us up, and his last name was Grooms, Grooms. I'll never forget this guy. And he retired from the Army, and his last duty was at Fort Bragg. Well, he wore a straw hat, so I nicknamed him Brooms for like broom straw. And he said if we ever wanted to go out on the town, he gave us his card. So me and the boys, 2 or 3 times during boot camp, I called him. Of course, it was late at night, and he took us into Fayetteville, and we went clubbing and goofing off and doing what young fellas do. He was quite the tour guide, and I mean, he was an amazing fellow. I ended up giving his card to 3 or 4 other guys in my barracks that ended up utilizing him on a couple of occasions. But yeah, he was quite a fellow. It was good. We made some pretty good memories. It was kind of neat going to boot camp for 10 weeks. But like I said, those last 2 was hauling off beds and lockers and boarding up the windows because they closed the training center down. So then that temporary 1941 at the end of the building started to mean something.
Yeah. So you mentioned AIT, going to AIT. What did you go for?
I was an 11D10 reconnaissance scout, and which you go through a lot of rifle training, almost like a sniper, and you get qualified with, I mean, everything under the sun. And because you're a scout, you go out in 3-man patrols. You have an officer and a sergeant, and then me was a radio operator. And when I got to Alaska, you could be 11D10. Now, of course, going to Fort Knox, we was trained with the armor, the tanks, because of course that's where General George Patton was at. And we went to his museum on a couple of occasions. I'm kind of a history buff, so that was way neat for me. Mm-hmm. And but when I got to Alaska, it was all armor. I mean, artillery. So, but you call in the same, you know, your grid coordinates on your map are the same, and you call it into a thing called FDC. It's called the Fire Directional Center, and it's a giant computer as big as a truck. Not like today. And when you call in them grid coordinates, the numbers they send out to the artillery is the numbers they dial in on the howitzers, whether it be 102, 10. We had 102, 105, 155, and 8-inch howitzers from small to biggest. So whoever was closest or able to fire that fire, I'd be on the radio, fire mission. Of course, now everybody's paying attention, but FDC is who I'm actually talking to give them those grid coordinates on the map. And then, like I said, that computer would decipher down. They would send the numbers to the artillery or the armor, the tanks, or whoever. You could be calling in. They could call in off a ship off the coast or have an airstrike. It just depends on the situation you might be in. But in my case, it was always, and being in Alaska, and when we would go out during the summer and winter, it was just always artillery, of course, because that's all they had up there.
And was that training, or were you?
I was trained in Fort Knox, Kentucky, but once I got stationed in Alaska, twice and 3 times a year, you had to go out for. During the winter, during the summer, you went out for 3 weeks, and during the winter, you went out for 3 weeks. In between time, you might go out for a day or 2, but you would just, to stay on top of your game, and they would just go out and practice. You had an impact area where they had dropped old tanks and old trucks and stuff, and they would paint them like bright yellow or orange. And they had several of them in this impact area. And you had a map of the impact area, which had the grid coordinates. You'd have to find that target, call in, and you'd make corrections, like the first when they first fired their first rounds, they may be too long, or you'd have to correct them. Drop 100 meters and right 100 meters. They would send another one, and you would make corrections till you got dialed in on the target. And then you would just call in fire for effect, and then they would unload. All of them would unload. So it would be pretty intense.
That would be impressive to watch.
I got some. You remember those little cameras that you threw away? You took them in and had your film developed, but you just threw the camera out. I was the best radio operator on post. So when General Creighton Abrams came to Fort Richardson, of course they called me in, and in fact they come and got me out of a bar, and said, "Tomorrow we're going out." Oh, really? And so we went out, and I had dialed in those targets on that impact area to the point where I had map pins in my map. So it was easy for me I could almost do it blindfolded by braille and tell you what the grid coordinates for that map tack was. So when we went out there, you have a night fire, and you call in a thing called a northern star. And it's 5 giant flares. And there's 4 corners and then one in the middle. And you could call in at a night fire, you would call that northern star in, and you could see what you were shooting at and make those, call in that fire and make those corrections I was talking about earlier, and then fire for effect. Well, the training we had in Fort Knox was Drill Sergeant Baker and that crew that taught us there were amazing, incredible good teachers, and at least they were to me. And by the time I got to Anchorage, Alaska, we went through because I was trained in armor, we went through a few things. There's a few different things in your call letters and calling in, but not many, but enough to where I spent like a week. We went through like a refresher course type thing. And then after that, it was, and then staying creased so much, I ended up being a flag bearer all the time at parades and stuff, which at the time was a little annoying, but after I got out, I thought it was pretty cool. But I still today, I'm a carpenter, and I get on construction sites, and like I said, my nickname's Cowboy. I said, "Cowboy, why do you crease your jeans?" I said, "'Cause they're mine." And I said, I left home creased, and I said, I just feel good. I get up in the morning, I leave home, I'm creased, I feel good about myself. And there's no better way to start the day than to feel good about yourself when you walk out your door to go to work.
So tell me what a typical day would have been like when you were in Alaska at that post.
Well, you got up in the morning, of course, you went to breakfast, and then you went to formation. And being a scout, there was in my company, in my battery, there was only two scout teams, and each one of us was assigned a Jeep. We was in Bravo battery, so B battery, so mine was B5, and can't remember this guy's name. We called him Stoneface, but his was B3. And we would go over to the motor pool. You had a regular job at the motor pool. Mine was when we weren't doing our thing, or as a group, as the 3 of us with our Lieutenant Stillman and Sergeant Vetches and me. If we weren't doing some sort of training as a scout, my regular job at the motor pool was tool room. So I signed out tools if somebody when they was repairing stuff, which they were repairing stuff quite often. And then other than that, you just there was things that would I did the last 16 months I was in the Army. I did race relations once a month.
I'm sorry, when what?
Race relations, the last 16 months, and which back then there was a lot of stuff going on. It wasn't very pretty, and some of my dearest friends in my life that I grew up with are black, and I never thought of them as that. I just thought of them as my friends. But back home, it's just you just never thought about it. I mean, we didn't. Us kids didn't. And I got to this. 2 of my closest friends in life is Charles and Janet Jones, who I grew up with, and they've been together since they were 14 months old, and they're married and got 2 beautiful daughters. We're as close as family. You couldn't get any closer than we are. So I just never thought about race. Was never a thing in our family. It was just Mama being a nurse for 36 years. Of course, she's just in the N word. You'd be better off saying the F word around the house than saying the N word around my house. My mama would whip your butt. She's no farm girl, and she milked cows growing up. If she got a hold of you, you wasn't getting away. And but it never happened. Those words just never came up. We just never thought about it. Just never did. And when I first got to my company, B Battery in Alaska, when you first get there, you're in what they call transit for like 3 weeks or so. Well, 3 or 4 of us ended up being there for like a month. Something happened to our orders, and it just so happened when I was in transit, the barracks I was in when I got sent to B Battery, it was the next barracks down. Well, when I got there, I was there about a week, 10 days, and actually I was only there about a week, and the battery had won some sort of contest, and we got sent down to it's in southern Alaska. We got sent on a fishing trip, and I thought, heck, I'm only here for 4 or 5 days. I get to go on a fishing trip, and the battery had won something. I don't know, can't remember what it was. Seward. We went to Seward, Alaska. Got to stay in these cabins and go out on these boats and fish. Then when we got back, we was back about a week and a half. They called me in to the first sergeant's office and told me I was going to race relations with Sergeant Pugh, who was a black sergeant. And I said, okay. They said, just check in with Sergeant Pugh, because it was the next morning. So I went and found Sergeant Pugh, and he said, yeah, I'll meet you in the morning. He said, right after formation, he said, we'll just walk on over there. It's just across post. I said, all right. So during that day, all the guys that I had got to meet, they said, yeah, Lambright, all the new guys have to go to race relations. Well, they said it like it was a bad thing. And I said, really? They said, yeah. Well, I get over there with Sergeant Pugh, and there was the white guys sitting over here and black people sitting over here. I started listening to these stories. There's a black sergeant and a white sergeant. I can't remember the white sergeant's name, but the black sergeant was Sergeant Jones. And I'm listening to these ugly stories from both sides. And this Sergeant Jones looked at me, and he looks at my name, and he said, Lambright, you look a little upset. I said, aren't you? I said, everybody that's told a story in here since I've walked in this room will get their ass whipped where I'm from. I said, for doing what you're talking about doing. Well, a couple of white guys, they used that N-word, said, you never been around. I said, I come up out of my chair. I'm hot-headed. I was going to whoop somebody. Well, this Sergeant Jones, he's a pretty big fella. He grabbed me. And I told this guy that was mouthing me, I said, I'll find you. And I said, I'm going to put a good old-fashioned Nevada whooping on you. You'll take to your grave, boy. And I said, because nobody talks to me like that. Nobody. Well, they took him out of the class. And he didn't come back in. And Sergeant Jones said, just sit down and mellow out. I said, I'm not going to listen no more of this. I said, now, if that's how y'all want to live back home, I said, you're stupid. One. I said, when I was in boot camp, I had a drill sergeant named Drill Sergeant Boykins. I said, which he came out one day and said, there is no color here. There's only one color here, and it's OD green. I said, think about it. And I said, if we were in a war zone and the guy in the foxhole next to you saved your life, would you give a damn what color he is? I said, I wouldn't. Well, it got real quiet. Well, Sergeant Pugh and I, after class, it seems like 2 hours long or longer. And I was just vibrating with anger. On the way back to the company, Sergeant Pugh said, you don't care what you say when you say it, do you, Lambright? And I said, well, if I got something to say, I was brought up, just say it. You don't want candy coat the crap, just tell them that way everybody knows. There ain't no guesswork. Well, the next morning I get called to the first sergeant's office and get called into the captain's office. So, of course, you're standing at attention. Private Lambright reporting his orders, sir. Here's the battalion chaplain, the battalion commander, my first sergeant, my section chief, Sergeant Vetches, and Lieutenant Stillman. Now the whole, that's the 3 that I'm the scouts with. And of course, my first sergeant and my captain sitting there and my executive officer. And I'm thinking, man, I've done something wrong. And he said, Captain said, at ease, Lambright. I said, yeah. He said, we heard about your little escapade yesterday at race relations. And I said, oh, really? And I said, well, you must have heard that from Sergeant Pugh. And they said, yep. I said, well, I said, I meant what I said. And I said, I just never been around anything like that. And it's foreign to me. And I said, it aggravated me. And the battalion chaplain said, Lambright, he said, you can't get that upset over spilled milk. I said, it wasn't spilled milk. And I said, and if you talk like that around me, I'd have done the same thing to you. I said, no, I said, what's right's right and what's wrong's wrong. And I said, if it ain't, and what's fair is fair. And I said, if it ain't fair, it's probably wrong. And I said, what was going on yesterday was crazy. I just never heard it. Guys blowing up somebody's house, and thank God that they were gone for the weekend because some black kid walked a white girl home. I'm like, are you kidding? And that's when I got upset. And of course, there was black guys telling the same kind of story. Well, at the end of this little deal in my captain's office, he said, how'd you like to represent B Battery at race relations for the rest of your time in the Army? I said, well, I really wouldn't like to. I said, if I'm going to have to listen to that crap. And my battalion commander said, well, you ain't got a choice. He said, we would like you to represent B Battery. And they told me some stories of stuff that had gone on at some other, at a base in Hawaii and some other bases that was ugly stuff. And so when I come out, of course, all the guys want to know, why was he in the captain's office? And I said, well, you're not going to believe this. I said, all the new guys that come from now on ain't going to have to worry about going to race relations. Because I said, I'm going to be there. Well, Sergeant Pugh, they try to alternate. They don't. Sergeant Pugh, when they found out that afternoon, he went in the captain's. He went down to first sergeant and asked. He said, "I want to be with Lambright for the next 16 months." Now, Sergeant Pugh was a career guy, so after, in fact, he got about a month after. I stayed in Alaska because they were doing the pipeline, the Alaska pipeline at the time, and he was in the Army. I mean, he was there in Anchorage a couple months after I got out in November, but then he got transferred to I think he went to Germany because he was a career guy. But yeah, he volunteered to be with me for that next 16 months for my remainder of my time in the Army. I got to go. He's a wonderful guy. Well, absolutely wonderful. We got along. We ended up being real dear friends, and then I lost track of him, but. Yeah, he was good people. And it was funny, the next month, as soon as I walked in the classroom, that Sergeant Jones and that other, I had the same two sergeants that was in charge of that class during that time. They said, just mellow out, Lambright. I said, I am. I said, if them ugly stories start up, I said, I'm not gonna. I said, calm them down. Tell them to be cool. He said, that's not the point here. So that Sergeant Jones, the next couple of months, he stayed within 10 feet of me in the class. Wherever I sat, he was close by. I didn't flare up again, but I did have to listen to some stupid stuff, which I didn't appreciate. But you learn. And in fact, it was kind of cool when a month before I got out, 2 or 3 white guys and 2 or 3 black guys came up to me and said, because those 2 sergeants made me talk. Every class, I had to say something. And I just told them how I grew up and how my mama raised us and, going to church. And I had 2 or 3 black guys and 2 or 3 white guys a month. My last month there, I didn't go in November because I was getting out. And they said, you've changed my way of thinking. Thanked me and shook my hand, hugged me, and told me. In fact, we ended up going to all 6 of us, 7 of us went to the EM club and had a drink. And they all wished me goodbye and wished me luck. And so I got something across to somebody. I don't know about the rest of them, but at least those 5 or 6 guys, it was pretty neat to have them come up. Because I would have never guessed until that happened. Because they never talked to me after class, any other time. And that class lasted most of the morning. You'd have a couple of breaks. And like I said, they would go out, and white guys over here, black guys over there. I just stood in the middle. Me and Sergeant Pugh hung out, and I didn't care what the rest of them did. But it was pretty neat to have them come up and tell me that. In fact, that was one of the first things I told my mama when I got home. I said, Mama, your them ass whippings and that scolding I got worked out pretty good. I said, because this is what happened. And I told her that whole story. She was pretty proud of herself. So it's pretty neat.
Yeah. Are there any other memorable things that happened, to you, or things that you did that while you were in the service?
During the being in Alaska, they were trying to train us to be Arctic trained like the Russians. Now the Russians had the largest Arctic army trained army in the world. And man for man wise, ours was small compared to theirs. But during the wintertime, all those 3-week training sessions had a name. Ours was called Jack Frost. And my last winter trip was called Jack Frost 8. I was only winning 2, Jack Frost 7 and Jack Frost 8. Well, Jack Frost 8 was the end of the Jack Frost routine. Well, some of the guys I met up there with had been there obviously a lot longer than me. And we were getting ready to go out for this one winter, and Philip Walls, he was the lightweight boxing champion of USARAL. USARAL is the United States Army Alaska. And he won that summer of 73, late summer of 73. He came around telling everybody that you could try out for the boxing team. For the next week, you could just go to the gym and just wear your sweat clothes. Well, of course, all of us said, well, we don't have to wear our fatigues. So we all signed up, a bunch of us, and went over there and got over there, and there's that Sergeant Jones. He's the special service guy. He runs the gym, the guy from race relations. And I thought, how cool is this? So I went up and introduced myself. I said, hey, Sergeant Jones. He said, Lambright. I said, hey, I came over from Beaver. I signed up for this boxing team. Now I had no intentions of doing the boxing thing. And Monday goes by, Tuesday goes by, and after lunch we was all going out on some of the guys were going out on the parade field. They called it, was like football field, and smoking pot and drinking. Well, we was out there, and one day I went out there. It was like Wednesday, and no, it was Tuesday. The second day I was there, and I was out there by myself, and I smoked about 3 cigarettes a week. So I went out there to have a cigarette. And this guy comes out, he's in a white robe. He's the blackest human being I've ever seen in my life. And he's got his hood over. He comes over and he's smoking a joint. And he said, hey, little rabbit. Rabbit. I stood up and I said, Marcus Lambright. He said, Dave Miles. Little rabbit. I said Marcus Lambright. Well, this friend of mine, Willie, that was in our battery, he was the heavyweight champion of Alaska. This guy I'm talking to is from A battery. I don't even know this guy. Never seen him before. He's the lightweight champion. Well, Willie comes out of the gym looking for me and starts screaming at this guy. But he's calling him Cave. I was like, Cave? He comes running up and he said, Cave, he said, don't even think about it. I said, think about what? And this guy looks at me, and he's got this white hood on, and he throws it back, and he said, I usually just whip white guys. He's big enough to whip me, that's for sure. And I said, really? I said, why'd you come up talking to me? He said, because he's out here all alone, and I thought you were smoking pot. You're smoking a cigarette. I said, you're smoking pot. Well, he goes back in. Willie proceeds to tell me that he don't have white sheets. He got OD green sheets and pillowcases. He won't wear white underwear, won't wear white nothing. Well, during the rest of the week, I see him every day. And I said, why did I said to Willie, why do they call him Cave? He said, because he's so black. He's like looking in a cave. So the next day I see him in the gym. I said, hey, Cave. He said, hey, little rabbit. And he kind of smiled. Well, we get back to the gym. I ended up boxing this guy. I told the guy, they told me who they was going to match me up with. I went over to him. I said, look, I ain't into getting on this boxing team. I said, don't be socking me in my face. Well, he did. And I flipped out. And I just body slammed him. And I was going to put the boots to him, cowboy style, when that Sergeant Jones grabbed me. He said, what the hell's wrong with you? I said, I told this guy not to be socking me in my face. He said, Lambright, we're boxing. I said, I don't care if we're square dancing. I asked him not to sock me in my face. I'm ugly enough. He socked me right in my nose? No. Well, he wanted to get me on the boxing team. I did stay on the boxing team for the rest of the summer. Had 4 or 5 fights, but because you're an amateur, you only fight 3 2-minute rounds, and there ain't no judges. The winner wins by applause. Well, I won 4 out of 5. One was a tie. I thought I lost the last 2, to be honest with you. I just think I had more friends in the audience than he did. But it was about 2 weeks after. I'm walking down the hallway, and I had some friends in A Battery, and I walked by Cave's cubicle. They don't have rooms. And he goes, little rabbit. And I said, hey, Cave. He said, come on in. Well, when I walked in, you wouldn't have believed the black people that gathered up out in the hallway staring in his room, in his cubicle. And I said, what's with all these guys, Cave? He said, the only people who came in here as white, he says, is my sergeant and my commanding officer. I said, really? I said, you really got a problem with it, don't you? He said, yeah, I do. He said, but I don't got a problem with you, little rabbit. And I said, that little rabbit stuff pissed me off when we first met, but I said, don't bother me at all now. And he said, good. Well, I got out. When I got back to B Battery, which is just the other end of the building, which we're on the 3rd floor, I went back 10 minutes, and everybody in my barracks that had been there longer than me went, you were in Cave's cubicle? I said, yeah. I said, his stuff is nice and neat, clean, pressed, like you wouldn't believe. Not like you guys. Of course, I was teasing half of them. And they said, really? And I said, yeah. I said, well, we don't even think. We go by there, we wouldn't even look at that. I said, really? And so that was kind of a neat memory to think that here's a guy that just hated white folks, and all of a sudden, because of some little deal at a gym, a fluke really, to have that happen. It was like the guys at the end come and shaking my hand and thanking me for telling them stories I told. That was why when that lady, I stopped downstairs next door, and because I was just meandering around. I got here at 9 o'clock, 10 to 9, and I just started walking around. And I seen those 2 gals in there sitting by themselves. I said, I wonder what they're doing. So I walked down there, and they mentioned the story thing, and I said, well, let me tell you a story. And when I left Fort Ord to go to Fort Richardson, and this was it's like first week of June. No, it was about the 2nd, 3rd week of June of 73. I stopped in Portland to see some friends of mine. I got off the plane. I was supposed to fly into Seattle to SeaTac and then fly out to Fort Richardson. Well, I had friends in Portland. And we drove up to Seattle. And they got that World Fair Park where that Space Needle thing is. And I was telling them girls, I said I got up there. And of course we started drinking. I missed my plane. And they got some sort of fair going on. It wasn't the World Fair. It's like 10 years after the World Fair. They got something going on. There's all kind of stuff being sold. And there's a circus carnival there for kids to ride the Ferris wheel and stuff. Well, I wanted to get on that Space Needle. Well, I'd been drinking too much. And they got a security guy on that thing. He's big as a Green Bay Packer. And so I went to get on. He said, nah. I said, why? He said, you've been drinking too much. I said, well, if you come out here and have a few drinks, we could both go up. And he laughed, and I laughed, and we ended up going to a place that said free coffee and donuts. And so I went in there to eat, because I hadn't eaten. I ate about 4 donuts. Right behind me, there's a group of kids, well, not kids, they're about my age. And they're listening to the 3 guys that got their back to me. And they're probably the length of this table behind me. And the free donuts and coffee, they're in there, it's Christians. they're you know, they're kind of like having Bible study with anybody who will listen. And so I'm listening to him, and these five guys are asking questions of these three older fellas that's right behind them. I can't see them. And little did I know that there was two of them were Christian ministers, and the third one was a rabbi. Well, the rabbi guy, which I didn't know at the time, I did find out later. One guy asked a question, and the rabbi starts talking. He said, it's sad. He said, well, we're losing our storytellers. And he said, you know, the grandmas that have the granddaughters sitting on her knee and the grandpas having the grandsons on their knee. And I turned around and I was thinking about my grandpa, my dad, and my uncle. I thought, I got to talk to this guy. So when I walked next door, and she said to tell the stories, and everybody my whole life, is when things would get a little boring, they'd say, hey, Marcus. I'd say, what? Or Cowboy, one of the two. Tell us a story. And I'd say, all right. And then tell them the cowboy story from home or whatever. Because back home, growing up in Fallon, we had the high school rodeo. And we could, at the end of the winter and first part of spring, we could go to rodeo practice at the fairgrounds instead of going to PE. And you'd get a credit. But all we did was go over there and drink beer and ride sheep until the rodeo came around. And I was the only bull rider in high school. And was the only one, of course, and again, your kids, you know, come time the rodeo come, we all start drinking, but out back somewhere, and you're in northern Nevada, and it was like growing up in the Wild Wild West, to be honest with you. It wasn't like elsewhere. In fact, I was here in 2010, 11, and 12, and I worked for a guy named Owen Anderson. He's pretty well to do. He owns the block that I just moved off of, he owns the entire block plus. And I left here in June of 2012, and I went home to Tennessee, and then I ended up going home to Nevada. And actually, I went to California to take a job that fell through, and I went back. It was about 3.5, 4 hours from my hometown. So when the job fell through, I just went home to my hometown, and everybody knows me, so everybody wanted me to work on their house, so work wasn't no problem. But the guy I worked for, Owen, in September of 2015, drove all the way to Nevada to get me to come back. And me taking care of my daughter, she's got epilepsy and extreme diabetic, extreme asthma, and some other things. We were like 2.5, 3 hours from Reno, from a hospital that could take care of her condition. And because I'd worked here before and knew where he lived and knew where I was going to live once we made the deal, it was like 4.5 blocks that way was Memorial, and 4.5 blocks that way is St. John's. And I take a thyroid pill, so every 6 months I got to have lab work done to see if they're going to adjust the dosage. So I went to Memorial. So when I said I accepted the deal he offered, and we made a deal. That way my little girl she was within walking distance of where we lived on North 6th of every doctor she's had. She's got 5, plus a dietitian. So it was took a lot of weight off of Daddy's shoulder to know that she'd be that. And the doctor she's have here I finished up the work for Owen. I call him Andy. And we moved April 1st, actually the last part of May, we moved down to Southern View, and I finished up. I finished up all the structural work. As a carpenter, I learned a lot. I don't know. I was a high-paid carpenter in the San Francisco Bay for about 5 years, and it was because of my structural knowledge. But I don't know. Like an engineer has those mathematical formulas. I don't know those, but when you do something so often, and it might not be the exact same thing, but you can see the resemblance or the similarities of some things. I got in a few fusses over the years with some engineers that, not fusses, but I just asked them, I said, hey, you know, I've done this before. I said, but we didn't use 1/2-inch plywood. We use 5/8 or 3/4. And I said, but the situation is very similar. Well, the engineer got a little offended and didn't get snooty, but a little bit. Well, a few days later, they came back and said, Cowboy, and I said, what? They said, you know, we redid our numbers and you're right. 5/8 or 3/4 would be better. Well, when those engineers left, my superintendent or the job owner just said, Cowboy, whatever you want to do, you do. Because they knew me. And so I did. On the one job, I used 5/8. On the other one, I used 3/4. And both those two complete engineering different engineering companies. The one wasn't on the job. I called him. I called the architect, and he said, call me back in about a half hour. He said, that engineer for that job will be here in the office. I said, all right. So I called him. Of course, you got to go down to the job shack, and there ain't no cell phones. So I went down to the job shack, called him, and explained to him. I said, look on page, give him the blueprints. I said, look at section, and look at that cross section. I said, now, I've done similar 20, 30 times, similar situation. I said, but you've got 3/8 on here. I said, I'd use 5/8 or 3/4. He said, well, let me look into it. The other engineer was on the job site when I brought it up and got a little offended. And but both of them called me and said, yeah, go ahead and use 5/8. Well, when that one engineer came back on the job, I said, it's already done. I said, we had some extra, I just lied to him. I said, we had some extra 3/4, so I just put 3/4 on there. And he said, well, I'm glad you did. He said, because I run the numbers. He said, in that 1/2 inch, you needed a minimum of 5/8. And 3/4, of course, being thicker, stronger, structurally. So over the years, my reputation of having that structural knowledge stuck with me. And then I'm a good teacher and fun to work with and a good boss because I just don't point my fingers. I always kept my tools on. And I didn't care if you shoveled manure. If that's what we had to do, we had to do. I was with you. And once you're growing up on a farm, of course, you know I shoveled plenty of manure and over the years. But
Well, you've talked about a little bit about what you've done post-service, and you talked a lot about how your early life influenced your military life, but what about is there anything in your military time that influenced your life after military?
preventive maintenance. Like I said, when we go to the motor pool, I didn't pay any attention to it growing up, but I noticed a lot of the farmers, when I would haul hay for neighbors, and my buddy Eddie and I hauled a lot of hay together, everybody took care of their tractors and their car and trucks. But as a kid, you're not paying attention to that. When I got in the Army, you're changing oil, you're staying on top of stuff. Well, it dawned on me. I was looking back, I thought, man, I remember old Mussy, one of the farmers we hauled hay for every year. He was just strict about it, but he did it himself. He called in no mechanic. So since I got that part, still today, I have a 2005 Ford Ranger that runs as good today as it did brand new. I bought it September 3rd, 2005. And you can go, I change, they say change your oil every 3,000. I change mine every 2,500. I take it in for checkups. In fact, I got a notice here a while back I guess I got some of those faulty airbags. And so Jeremy down at Landmark Ford out on Prairie Crossing, I got to call him when I leave here and make an appointment for next Monday afternoon to go get my new airbags in. But while I'm there, I'm going to make an appointment because I just want them to go through one of them, I think it's called a 42 checkpoint thing, and to just stay up on it because I understand why they used to hang horse thieves, which is what they ought to do to these carjackers. Being in construction, my truck is everything to me. And of course, my daughter, she can't drive because of her medical condition. So you depend so much on your transportation. It ain't no wonder that back in the day, which is a little extreme, hang the horse thieves. But when you think about it, that's your livelihood. You can't do nothing without your transportation. So these guys at carjack, I have no sympathy for them at all. None. In fact, they wouldn't want to carjack me because I just run over them. I'd as mellow out as I have, there's just a few things. If you cross that line, because now you're dealing with me being able to take care of my daughter, which really set me off. But yeah, the preventive maintenance thing, that and just in the service, there's such a, what's the word, your scheduling. That scheduling thing helped me as I got better at my work after I got out being a carpenter, and then you get made a lead carpenter, and of course you only got like 2 or 3 guys under you. Then you get made foreman, and you got the whole crew under you, and then superintendent. Your scheduling thing, I wouldn't have been near as good at it without that scheduling, because you in the service, you just eat and sleep it. You don't even, it's not like it's a conscious effort. Those things are there. You already know about it. You're told at formation. You're told by your second chief, told by your commanding officer, your first sergeant, and everybody else. You know what's going on every minute of every day. And that definitely put me, I would have never been able to do, I mean, at such an early age. I mean, I was running jobs at 26. And, you know, when you got, I had to go to my dad, my real father, tell him, I said, you know, I got guys on the job site that's 10 years older than me that are offended that they made me the boss. And he told me, he said, here's what you do. He said, Monday morning, line everybody up. He said, start with the oldest guys. And he said, let them go, ask them what they do best, and let them go do what they do best. And I said, what about everybody else? He said, everybody else? He said, everybody else ain't offended. I said, oh, yeah. It worked. By the end of the week, all those guys that was kind of pissy with me, you know, a few minutes out of every day or whatever, it was like all of a sudden we're eating lunch together. Hey, you know, Friday payday, you know, let's go down to the bar. I'll buy you a drink, cowboy. Really? You know, a couple of weeks ago, he was mad at me because I was your boss. And so that definitely, the preventive maintenance and the scheduling thing, because it's so rigid. And like I said, when you're going to boot camp and they're getting you in that frame of mind where you just follow orders, you got to be a reactionary, and that helped a lot too. In the late 70s, I got into what they call production framing. Now, framing is the rough end of it. When you just frame it, you just build a shell. But I had helped some guys in a metal shop. Watched them. I didn't help them. I watched them build this jig on this table. They were setting up to build these metal things where they could just set them on this table, and they already knew the dimensions of each part, and they would set them on this table and weld them, flip this thing over and weld the other side. It was about a year or two later, I thought, I could build a table, and we could frame the walls and just take them over you could frame them on site. You just pick them up with a forklift, take them over and stand them. Instead of having to, I would snap plate and detail. If this was a house or apartment, I would snap out all the walls on the floor with chalk lines. And then you would plate it with two by fours tacked together like that. Then you had to detail all the studs and the doors and windows in. And some of the criticals, they call criticals like 4x6 or something for support to go clear to the roof type thing. And so I got with some guys, and I mentioned it, and they had been thinking about it also. And we ended up being, there was just before I left Oregon and went south to do those 51 houses on Pyramid Lake in Nevada. I think it was that engineering company that I talked about where the guy told me I was right. They had a guy, he was Portuguese, down in San Diego, multi-millionaire. They said, look, they had talked about me and my crew. Well, there was only 6 or 7 of us. And they said, you want this guy to frame your house. Well, I didn't know what they had said about it, but they offered us so much money. We went down to San Diego. They put us up in a motel. This Portuguese guy, the third day we were there, he hired a film crew. So about a week goes by, and these 2 guys with this tripod, they're filming. I asked them, I said, what are you guys doing? They called the owner guy by name, I can't remember his name. Said he asked us to film y'all. I said, why? He said it had something to do with whoever recommended you. Some architect or engineer. I said, oh yeah. I think that guy's name was Blake, that engineer. And a couple of days later, here come that Portuguese. He said, cowboy. I said, what? He said, does these film guys bother you? I laughed, and he said, they bother you, don't you? I said, well, I'll put it to you this way. I said, I was probably recommended to you because if you come on my job, I said, this is my job. It ain't your job anymore. This house ain't yours until I leave. I said, I'm going to build this thing like it's my own. And I said, if you come on my job, you better come here to work. Because otherwise, unless you're delivering material or you're my boss and you're checking on the schedule, is there anything I need? That has to do with business. I said, but otherwise, I said, I really don't, it makes me a little uncomfortable, but not that uncomfortable. We never seen those guys again. They filmed the entire job. At the end of the job, they come and they had a little barbecue. We just roughed it in. We didn't stick around for no finished work or any of that crap. We was too young and full of crap. Well, they come and he had a barbecue. The electrician and plumbers were there because as you're framing, as we got the foundation done, they got wiring and pipes to run, and the electrical guys got to bring in they got the utilities to bring in and through the foundation and whatnot. So we had this barbecue, and I'm looking at this film. They're showing it right down the job site. They got a big tent, and they said the Portuguese guy said, "Yeah, we're going to have a big party at my house in about a month and show the whole thing." I said, "We better turn the volume down if you're going to have women folks around, because the language we use is horrifying." And he laughed. He said, "Yeah, we probably should." I said, "No, you should. You better." Because, I mean, everybody, it didn't matter if it was my crew or the plumbers, the stuff that was we would holler at each other back and forth. A lot of folks would take offense, but because we were so used to one another, that's just how we talked. I had one guy ask me one time, he said, "You always talk like that to your crew?" I said, "I'm not in Sunday school." I said, "The mentality out here is about as deep as a teaspoon of water." I said, "If you talk to them nice," I said, "they just look at you like you're sick." I said, "So this is how we all talk." I said, "Ain't nobody taking offense." So that was about that. But yeah, the scheduling and the preventive maintenance carried me still today. I'm still the same way, and I'm I could have went through that and not paid any attention, but it had like I said, I was able to reflect back to when I was in my childhood, and those farmers taking care of their equipment, and then they weren't near as strict as they are during a service, because now you're counting on your vehicle. You're in a war zone. That stuff's got to work now, not just your weapon, everything, including you. So it was that, and the scheduling had benefited me to no end, especially raising two daughters.
Well, if you could just in like one little paragraph, just a few sentences, um, uh, say something to the next generation who might see or hear your interview, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to give thanks every day that you're here. Be thankful for all you got, and be respectful of everybody no matter what. Some people are different, and some people might have a different opinion than you. It's no reason to get upset or angry, and think about your work ethic and the people around you, and if you're working for a company, that company's employees is what shines a light on that company. So even though you're not an owner of that company and you're an employee, you represent that company and represent yourself, and just do the right thing no matter what. What's right's right, and what's wrong's wrong, and what's fair is fair, and if it isn't fair, it's most likely wrong. And that if we would all think about them type of things, I think the world would be a better place. And and I think that when you are talking to somebody, look people in the eye, so you're not texting, because they can't see you. So you can say anything you want, and there's no feeling in the air. When you're sitting down talking to somebody eye to eye, there's feelings in the air, and you can see when there's times when you need to turn left or turn right or zig or zag or whatever. You don't know those things when you're texting or sending somebody an email. When you're sitting with them live and in color, you can definitely feel that. So that would be what I would give the next generation to just pay attention and be a little more giving and thoughtful of one another.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. We truly appreciate it, and thank you for your service to our country.
Oh, it's my pleasure.